the Lost Leonardo, eventually, so that piece, the Salvator Mundi, which was allegedly, they thought that was basically drawn by one of Leonardo's students or something like this. Mm-hmm. And that lady went to go restore it. She stripped a bunch of stuff off it and then basically repainted like 90% of it. And long story short, it ended up in the yacht of Mohammed bin Salman, the Prince of Saudi Arabia, for like $500 million.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of interesting things about that. And, you know, everybody has their opinion. And I will say, I am not an expert at all. And I'm just kind of, you know, observing and giving what I sort of think is plausible. But a lot of people think that it is actually real. Tony Tetra, the art forger, thinks it's real.
Does he really?
Yeah. Martin Kemp, who is the foremost Leonardo expert, I think thinks it's real, or think there's a very good chance that it's real.
Martin Kemp.
Yeah. But you know, I'm not sure. And what I do find interesting, like what you say is correct. So if you take a painting and you restore it to the extent where you've repainted a whole bunch of it, well, yeah, of course it looks like Leonardo because you just painted it to look like Leonardo.
Yeah.
I mean, so I don't know. I'm not saying that's what happened. Her name is Diane Modestini, and you know, she's very well regarded, and I don't know anything about this from an expert perspective, but I'll just say, you know, you do have to ask the question, like if it's been so extensively repainted, I mean, what can you really say about the painting? Right. You know, somebody like Kemp or Tetro will say that, you know, there are hallmarks of the work that definitely make it that. But the other thing here is, you know, so it was $450 million. That's a lot of money. That's a lot of money. And what the film gets into, which I thought was really interesting, was great piece of work, was there's a lot of pressure with that kind of money that can be brought to bear when really all you're talking about is opinions, right? I mean, would $450 million get you to say that Steve's the greatest guy who ever lived? It might make me say that, you know?
Tenet, that was the movie. Sorry to interrupt. Yeah, this was such a good scene. Play it with no audio so we don't get copyright and make it small. Sorry, what were you saying?
So the Leonardo, I mean, when there's that much money at stake, there's a lot of pressure that can be brought to bear, right? Mm-hmm. So what I thought was really interesting about that film was that all of these efforts, once MBS had bought the painting, there was a lot of pressure put by the Saudi government on the French government to make that thing be real. So if you remember, there was this whole thing about, like, you know, they're talking about as the male Mona Lisa. The most famous painting in the world is the Mona Lisa.
Yes.
Well, this thing, we're now going to make it be the male Mona Lisa.
Right.
So they were trying to get the Louvre to show the piece next to the Mona Lisa, right, and legitimize it. And
who was trying to do this? Mohammed bin Salman?
Yeah, okay. Because now he owns it. So he's like, all right, well, now I'm going to make this really valuable.
Just having that documented being there would be extremely valuable.
Yes. Because that's what happens with a lot of pieces. Like sometimes if someone has a questionable painting, they might lend it to a museum, you know, under really favorable terms. Why? Because they wanted to have that stamp. This was in the, you know, this was in MoMA.
Right.
So now you've just added value. But anyway, so he's trying to add this value. And what they did was they came to the Louvre, and the Louvre said no. I think they had a book printed up, and then they pulled it. And they were going to put it in there, and then they pulled it because they had doubts. So MBS says to the French government, hey, listen, we would consider it a great favor if you maybe suggested to the Louvre that this thing be shown next to the Mona Lisa, right? And then they said, and by the way, you know, we are building this huge city in the desert, and why wouldn't a French company get that contract? right?
Right.
Let's see if we can't do something here. That's kind of what the film talks about. And
that's the way the whole world works,
yeah,
man.
Yeah. And that's what, you think that art is kind of like some blue blood, kind of specialty pursuit for people with really high sensibilities. And it is. And they're very genuine and passionate people in art, but there's a whole other part of it. The market is a different animal altogether. I mean, that's really a lot of people who don't know much or care much about art for art's sake, use it as a useful financial instrument.
Right. Right.
Um,
Would this modern art be what it is culturally if it wasn't for the billionaires, the stunt type fellas, or the MBSs, or the popes for that matter, like with the Sistine Chapel,
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. Look, art always has to have patrons. I mean, the great art of the past had patrons.
Yes.
You had the Vatican, just every church in Italy has 12 master paintings. Somebody paid for those. There were great patrons at the turn of the century. Industrialist tycoons and stuff were building museums. Carnegie and all that kind of stuff. They're building museums. So there's always patrons, but I think it's kind of reached a different level now, and a lot of that is because there really aren't that many ways to transact that are not very traceable or that are really subjective, right? I mean, it's kind of hard. You can't carry around $50 million in gold. You can't. It's a huge amount.
Right.
You can roll up a little painting, carry it around across borders, you're fleeing a country or whatever. Hey, you got this thing. So there's that kind of utility. But also, with like know your client regulations and money laundering regulations and stuff like that, it's just a lot harder to do funky transactions. With art, it's so subjective that it's really easy to do. You can make 50 million become 80 million. You can make 20 million become 50 million with the stroke of a pen.
Right.
And it's all subjective. I mean, people talk about comparables and stuff, but I mean, like I said, who's really gonna, if somebody pays for it, then that's what it's worth.
Yes. Right.
So you don't know.
Right.
That's one of the reasons why it's used so much now.